Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Town of High Rivers Committee of the Whole meeting for Monday, June 8th. Mayor Snodgrass is unavailable today, so I'll be chairing the meeting. A couple of housekeeping notes to start with. We want to make sure that everybody has their mics muted unless you're asked to speak or requesting to speak. And the voting, any voting that will be done by objection only. Okay, so it's similar to the way Craig's been doing the meetings. So first, I'd like to call the meeting to order at 12:30 p.m. You've all been circulated a copy of the agenda. May I have a motion, please, to accept the agenda from Councillor Cooey if there's no additions?
I will give you that motion.
Thank you, Councillor. No additions or changes to the agenda from anybody? Excellent. Anybody opposed? Carried. We've also circulated out the minutes of the meeting from the last COW meeting on May 25th. I've had a chance to review them. They look pretty good to me. Can I have a motion, please, to accept the minutes as submitted? From Councillor McMillan.
I'll give you that motion.
Thank you. Anybody object? Seeing none, motion is carried. Our first item of business today is renewal surplus funding discussion. This is going to be held by Tom. I understand it's about an hour, or could take up to an hour. So, table's yours, or floor is yours, there, Tom.
Hello. Yeah, I'm here today to talk about the renewal grant programs. There's a number of them, but today specifically we're going to talk about 3 grant programs. 2 of the grant programs are for mitigation types of projects, and those would be the original $30 million mitigation grant, as well as FREC projects, which is the flood recovery and erosion control. That's what that stands for. The other part of the renewal grant funding is related to reconstruction. So there's 2 distinct, call it categories of projects. There's mitigation and then there's reconstruction. So for the reconstruction side of things, that's the long-term recovery grant. So for like further clarification, as with the long-term recovery grant, it's specifically not to be used for mitigation. So there's 2 distinct categories of grants and what their purposes are. So the first one up on the agenda for discussion, as we call it, the original 30 million mitigation grant. This was the grant that was granted to the town back in 2014 to help the town with a number of its large dike projects. So in the appendix, there's a list of all of the projects that were undertaken with this grant. Of them, the only one that's open right now is the Lynham Bridge project, which we all know is complete, but it's more or less in maintenance for another year. So really, its costs aren't going to be much different than they are today. So part of where this discussion came from, let me back up a bit, was this original $30 million grant was to expire in March, I believe, of this year. So there was there needed to be a discussion prior to that, but given the COVID pandemic, it was the government agreed to delay it until such time that the town could have a meeting and discuss it. What they were looking for was a number of projects that the town would identify going forward to basically account for what's remaining in the grant, and it's approximately $2 million of funding, of surplus funding, is available in the original $30 million grant. There's a list of projects included in the agenda as well, but maybe we should talk about FREC, if that's okay. and then we can kind of deal with all the mitigation projects kind of in one discussion. The next grant program is, of course, as I mentioned, FREC, again, flood recovery and erosion control. It also came from Alberta Environment and Parks. Its intent was to deal primarily with riverbank protection projects, riverbank armoring, and specific and property buyouts. Really is the main thrust of the FREC grant. Although FREC funding has also been used to do remediation of sites that have been bought out as well. So this grant's a little bit different. It does require a municipal contribution of 25% over everything above 2 million. So if it's a $5 million project, it's going to cost $750,000 is going to be the cost contribution from the town required for it, for example. So as it stands, there's two projects that are still on the books for FREC. The first one is the Eagle View Bank Protection project. This involves bank armoring for the Eagle View community, as well as the town, of course. The intent of this project is to essentially bury riprap within the CP right away, call it a passive option. It avoids going into the river and creating the environmental issues that come about in doing that. So that's kind of the intent of that project. It went out for RFP. An engineer has been selected to do the work. It's McElhaney. And we just had a kickoff meeting last week. So that project is moving ahead. The second project is the northeast and northwest. I got to look at my notes here if I'm looking off to the northwest 7-19-28-west of 4 buyout. It was a buyout that the town had made an offer for and unfortunately was not successful, or an agreement could not be reached. There's still funding that's remaining or set aside for that project. The funding could be reallocated somewhere else, and that is approximately $3.7 million. So I'll just keep on. So the next grant program is and I said I was going to stop, but maybe I'll just kind of go through
Tom,
it, if that's okay.
Yeah, Tom, maybe we can have council ask if there's any questions on that particular grant before we move on.
Okay.
Any questions about that one, council? Okay, I have one. So that 3.7 that's sitting there for that buyout, does that sit there forever, or is there a time limit on that?
Yeah, so there is a time limit on all of these grants. I believe that one has been extended to the end of this year. So, the town's going to need to decide what they want to do in terms of extensions. If a project was presented to Alberta Environment, and of course, if they approved of it, they'd want to see a schedule from the town. So, but yeah, they'll want to see a project before they extend it.
But that specific buyout, we couldn't reach agreement on that, correct? That
is correct. Yeah.
So if we don't reach agreement on that, can we reallocate that 3.7 to something else?
Yes. For a project that fits in with what the grant terms and conditions are for FREC type projects.
Excellent. Thank you, Tom. Any other questions? Riley has his hand up. Recognizing Riley.
Yes. Thanks, Jamie. Just to clarify, the land negotiation is closed and done. There is nothing outstanding in relation to that negotiation or offer. This is purely about the funding that was previously allocated to it. Because that deal is done and closed off, this funding is now available to be repurposed. So The negotiation is gone. Now we just have to decide what we're going to do with the funds.
Thank you, Riley. Any other comments? Councillor Cooey?
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Kinghorn. Just curious, I know we've got the list, the different lists in front of us. Tom, at some point in the conversation, will you and O'Reilly give us kind of your perspective on what kind of those options are, and kind of the priority of them?
Sure. Yep. Yeah.
No further questions. Please proceed, Tom.
Okay, the third group of projects, as I mentioned, are reconstruction projects. This is long-term recovery. I think we had a discussion relating to long-term recovery and the outstanding projects with it when we talked about 12th Avenue in terms of funding, and maybe Center Street as well. This was basically a grant from Municipal Affairs for $46.2 million that was intended for the reconstruction of flood damaged infrastructure. So aside from this program, of course, DRP was very similar, the repair of flood damaged infrastructure. Long-term recovery was more or less the same sort of conditions for its use. So the town had to present projects for long-term recovery. We're just working through the last two major ones. That would be 12th Avenue construction, of course, and Center Street. There's a number of projects that are still remaining. They are, I guess, they're listed in the report. There's Center Street resurfacing, Roundabout to the town boundary. There's about $100,000 set aside for that. And just to distinguish that from the other Center Street reconstruction project, this one is basically just to restore the surface of the road. So it would be a matter of coming in, I guess, tearing up the road, more or less what the county does, tear up the road, add oil if necessary to basically the surface, and relay it out and respread out the road. So it's more or less of a maintenance function for that road. The last project, Priority 4 project that talks about Center Street, that's a full-blown reconstruction of Center Street, basically from the bottom up, from the roundabout all the way south to the town boundary. And of course, there's only about half of that funding remaining, or projected to be remaining for that work, given the fact that money was allocated from 12th Avenue to partly to deal with the funding shortfall on 12th Avenue to deal with the underground utilities that were added. So basically, long-term recovery, going back, it's very restrictive. It's I would say it's quite difficult to get changes to projects. It takes a long time to get an answer back from Municipal Affairs on projects, and it's very unlikely, I think, that they're going to allow the town to add new projects, not unless all of these projects are undertaken by the town and that there is a surplus. So the only way I think that they're going to let the town add a new project is if all these projects are done and all the funds are expended and there's money left. So which may be highly unlikely by the time everything all pans out with long-term recovery. So there's a few other projects that, so for long-term recovery, a few risks in terms of, of these projects and funding. Of course, the town, I don't think the town wants to right now commit to a whole bunch of projects that potentially, and start them and potentially get put in a position where there isn't enough funding. There is a few projects that are going to, I guess, draw on on whatever surplus is left over from long-term recovery. Some risks are the interim dikes. Of course, hopefully they'll be wrapped up this year as the Southwest Dike gets completed, but there's still costs associated with that this year that are going to go towards the long-term recovery grant. There's also, I always think there's going to be, we do cost projections, of course, on projects, and this might not be a popular topic, but there could be cost overruns on projects that are ongoing. So I just want to flag that as a, as a potential risk. So I guess to wrap up long-term recovery, what I would suggest is that the town gets a little bit deeper into some of these projects like 12th Avenue, Center Street, get finalization of costs for the interim dikes, maybe see how the sanitary force main project pans out on High Country Drive, and then reassess what is left over, and then based on that, make a decision on whether or not you want to undertake the remaining priority projects, the 4 projects that are listed here. So I think long-term recovery is fairly, I would think is fairly straightforward strategically on how to deal with it. I don't know if anybody had any comments relating to that.
Doesn't look like anybody speaking. Oh, there's a hand. Kathy Cooey, Councillor Cooey.
Thanks again, Deputy Mayor Kinghorn. Tom, just a little bit back to that Center Street, because obviously we know that road's got some pretty good potholes and far worse beyond our borders. But so we're not going to be able to redo the whole road. But even the resurfacing, is that worth the money spent, or are we better just to continue to patch it until it can be fixed properly? I guess what I'm asking is, if you were just to resurface, does that fix the underlying issues that we're having on that road?
No, it's just a Band-Aid to resurface it. And I think that's probably what you've seen year in, year out. That road needs to be rebuilt. It likely has topsoil and it's subgrade. So unless that's dealt with, it's going to keep on doing what it's doing. So yeah, resurfacing it is more or less, I'd call it a Band-Aid. And in terms of looking at whether or not to patch it or whether to rip the whole thing up, I'd probably lean on some of the contacts at the county. They do that day in and day out, and kind of get an opinion from them on how they would handle it. So,
thanks, Tom.
Cola.
Yeah, thank you very much. Tom, you mentioned likely project overrun for some of the projects. Do you think we will be able to transfer funds within the grants, or the overrun will have to be paid by the town?
I guess to clarify it, I think for long-term recovery projects, if there's overruns or surpluses within the projects, long-term recovery projects, I think that there could be some moving around of money. In terms of the other 2 grants being able to cover shortfalls in long-term recovery, I don't think that's likely, because as I said, long-term recovery is basically for reconstruction only. The other ones are for mitigation kinds of projects. So I don't know if I answered your question, Cola.
Yes, somehow, except that you are still not sure whether the town will pick something up at the end of the day.
Yeah, I guess that's up to the. I guess I would say that's up to the town. But if you committed to a project, there's a certain. I think I know what you're asking. There's a hard limit on the funding for long-term recovery. So, say the town undertook all of these projects, and instead of spending 46.2, the town spent 47.2. That extra $1 million would have to come from the town.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Councilman Masterman.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Kinghorn. I think you might have just answered this, Tom, but I just, so we couldn't use that money that we're not going to use on the buyout to do Center Street a full-blown job on Center Street South.
That's correct. It would not be eligible because there's two different grant purposes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
And Riley, you had a question?
Just a clarification on what Kathy was asking. I was actually talking to Peter, our road supervisor, the other day regarding that road. And in terms of patching, it's probably reached its limit. So we are either redoing the surface or rebuilding the road completely. The MD has indicated that they are pretty busy with their own work. They've had a lot more potholes than normal as well this year. So scheduling might be challenging on that as well.
Any idea of a number? Is that number still good, Riley?
Oh, it's been a long time since we've looked at that number, Tom. I would suspect we might be a little on the low side now.
Yeah, I would think through the original cost estimate was probably healthy, but yeah, we'd have to re-look at it. Yes.
Okay. Any other questions for Tom on his presentation? Councillor Moore?
Yeah, just a comment on that road. Am I correct in assuming that it was originally built by the county, coming up to the old High River limit at the south end? Tom, are you knowledgeable about that?
Maybe. I'd assume it probably used to be a county road, just like a lot of the roads that haven't been rebuilt around here. Yeah.
Yeah. And there is another road in the northwest that is 64th Street, I believe it is, to 543. It's actually being maintained and resurfaced every year by the county, but because they have built it in the first place, it never stands up, and it's always washerboard and full of potholes every spring. So they resurface it again, and it just deteriorates to the point where you can hardly drive on it. So, and there isn't a lot of truck traffic on that road either. So I just question when you say that you should refer to the county about their expertise. It may not be that great in terms of expertise, and it may not be viable to even resurface that road without a full reconstruction.
Agreed, Councillor Moore. Riley, you had a comment?
Just a comment on I think you're right, Don. 64th, is it? Up by that goes up to 543 from Coal Trail. So that road out in the northwest by itself out there. I believe those costs have now come to the town, and it's now our road, even though the MD is still doing the work. And we are, because of the issues with the road and the potholing, we're actually contemplating it, returning it to a gravel dust controlled. And then we could actually do our own maintenance on it with our own equipment rather than always having to rely on the county. So that was actually something we wanted to probably bring to council at some point in the future. So returning to gravel and then dust controlling with a polymer solution, same as what we use on 20th actually, because we switched from oil to the a dust control solution on that one as well. So future conversation.
Thanks, Riley. Any other comments? Item 4.1 renewal surplus from council. Chris, is there anything you'd like to take away from us, or is this more for just information?
Well, I think from our perspective, council needs to take a look at the projects that have been completed and start thinking about if there is a surplus, what other projects can we quickly move up the pipe, so to speak, so that we can complete them before any of the deadlines that come in. We've been continuing to ask for extensions, but at some point in time, the government's going to say no and want some of their cash back, and so we need to have those conversations sooner than later, and especially because construction season is upon us now, that if there is an idea that priority projects that need to be done under those 3 funding programs, then let's bring those forward. There is an in-camera portion to part of this as well that we want to bring up once we've done our analysis in-house. That we'll bring back to council probably by the end of June. That will work into this priority setting process as well. So.
Thanks, Chris. I see Councillor McMillan is asking a question.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Kinghorn. And Chris alluded to it, because what my question is, because unfortunately my second screen is just on my phone, so I'm trying to look at the appendices because I didn't jot down all of my notes. But Tom and Chris and Riley, I guess according to one of those appendices, I was seeing some already figures that were saying that this allotment could be put towards this. So I guess that was my question, is what are some of the top priorities where you're thinking about shifting some of this money to?
Tom, can you answer that?
Yeah. So in terms of mitigation projects, the Southwest Dike, which it appears that it's going to be under budget, but we've just started construction on it. There's certain unknowns. So presuming the Southwest Dike is the town's top priority, I would say having some ability that if the town gets into a position that there's not enough funding, that some of this funding could be used to backstop it. That would be predominantly the mitigation grant. That's consistent with the priority of the mitigation grant. The second priority, more or less in line with FREC, would be the Eagle View Bank protection. We just started the engineering work. We have an old estimate on it as part of the project. We'll redefine the scope and come up with a new estimate on it, and at that time we'll know whether or not there's sufficient funding for it. So I'd more or less say for FREC projects, that would probably be the highest priority, or maybe the second priority for the town. A third priority that perhaps FREC or mitigation funding could be used for is that there's an issue right now with a section of the Northwest 2 dike, or riprap, if you will, where the river is eroding the bank, and it's actually between 2 sections of riprap armoring that the town's likely going to have to fix in the next year or 2. So I would suggest taking a look at that repair and kind of progressing that along, especially given that any work in the river, you want to have at least a year lead time to get it done. So do the work this year and be prepared, and then be prepared to do the actual construction next. So those are kind of 3 that come to mind, and then other projects are more related to kind of cleaning things up, like beechwood naturalization. So beechwood is hanging out there. There's all the roads are still there. I think it would be good to kind of, if you will, and I hope this isn't offensive, but finish the job, right, that we started. So beechwood might be a good thing to deal with and get it finally reclaimed. There's a few little things in Wallaceville maybe that could be done, such as getting rid of the power poles that are through there. And once the Wallaceville lift station is decommissioned, there'll be an opportunity to do that. And then as Riley and I were talking, there's a whole bunch of, like I said, smaller little projects, like little cleanup things that we could do. There's an encroachment issue of the Lynham Canal Dike on private property that we would like to sort out with the landowner. There's some outfalls that could be upgraded through the existing dikes that we could do some work around as well. So I guess in summary, there is a whole bunch of projects there that we could undertake. But I think the first three priorities, and I guess more or less finish the job, is kind of what.
Right.
Thanks,
Thank you, Tom.
I see Councilor Masterman, and then we'll have Councilman Nychuk.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Kinghorn. I've just got a couple of questions, and I'm a little challenged in that I don't seem to be able to do the split screen thing where I can actually look at the report and also look at all of your wonderful faces. So I just have your faces, so I can't look at the report right now, but I believe this is under 4.1, and there is reference to Beechwood and the natural, taking it back to a natural state. And I really like the comment that was either made in that section or elsewhere, that until that's done, it will be a constant reminder to residents of 2013. And so to me, it's a huge priority. But similarly, in Wallaceville, and I don't think you mentioned this, Tom, when you talked about Wallaceville, a couple of smaller projects, is the cleanup. Is the cleanup from the flood. There's still a ton of debris back there. And until that is gone, that also will be a constant, as people walk through that beautiful area, that will be a constant reminder when they see fridges and buildings and garbage containers and all kinds of stuff back there. But I also did want to ask about erosion control. You mentioned a section up in the northwest, but I'm wondering, and I think possibly this was in Appendix B, the reference to the piece up near the Osprey Nest, where we're losing land daily, and so that's that's on the radar. I'm assuming, or it is, Tom, right?
That's correct. Yeah, that is on the list. Yes, and in terms of options, that sort of thing, we haven't really done a whole lot of work. A river engineering expert was out when we were looking at that issue on Northwest 2, and we had the opportunity to take a look at it. But in terms of what that might look like, we don't have any options yet. Okay,
thank you. My other question, and I don't know if I'm jumping ahead here, but on page 6 of the report, there were just a couple of pieces in there that made my brain kind of explode a little bit. There's reference to under priority 4, I think it is Round South. I assume that is Roundabout South or something. It just says Round South. And then in the next sentence, it said, in the addition of the deeps. And I'm thinking, am I the only person in the whole world who doesn't know what the deeps is? Like, do you see that, Tom?
So you're talking about it must be Appendix C in terms of.
No, it's in the actual report. It's on page 6. And it's in the, it's under priority 4.
Project 458.
I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me. I'm just going by my notes, what I wrote down. And maybe I was the only one who saw that and tripped over it mentally. But
I can jump in because I found it before Tom. It is Roundabout south to town boundary, so that you're correct, Bruce. And the other one we got, we slipped into engineer lingo there. The deeps is the deep utilities, so water and sewer.
Of course, and I should have known that. I appreciate that. I do have another question, but I think we're still coming to it, so I'll hold off. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Councilor Masterman. Councilor Nychuk, you had your hand up, sir.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Kinghorn. I guess first off, just to reiterate what Councilor Masterman was saying, some of this was difficult to plow through, being, I guess, going to Riley's point about engineer lingo. I understand that we spend a lot of time with this and we get to know some of this stuff, but if we're going to publish this and we're going to put it out there for public consumption, I would just like it to be cleared up a little bit so that it's generally understandable to the public. I'll leave that as it is, and trust you guys will follow through on that. My question was in regards to this piece of the dike that is requiring some either further bolstering or some review. Tom, you made mention of this piece that you're looking at. Maybe instead of getting into that particular piece, could we as council just get an update on the condition of the diking since it's construction, and some indication of where we're at now on pieces that need to be repaired or bolstered, and where there might be some more considerations in the future? Is that something I can ask for, please?
In terms of issues that we're aware of right now, this is the only one I'm aware of, is this small 10-meter section that might require some riprap in the future. I believe there was recently an inspection of the dikes. Riley, I don't know if you're aware of any other issues that were that came about from that inspection, but otherwise, yeah.
No, I'm not aware of any other issues. We were just wrapping up the inspection though, and putting together a bit of a program so we know what to do and to inspect on a regular basis, so we're not always bringing engineers out. But when that's finalized, we can definitely bring that back to council for information.
Well, I'd appreciate considering this reallocation of funds. To me, that would be an extreme priority with any funds we have, is ensuring that the dike system as good as it can be, for lack of a better term. That would be my biggest concern and my biggest priority if we have funding. Yeah, potholes are a problem, but I'd rather focus on the river and that piece than some of the other things that have been indicated. So if we could get to that sooner than later and come to some considerations on reallocating funding that way, I'd appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Is the rest of council in agreement with Councillor Nychuk's words here? Yeah, lots of head bobbing. I would agree with Councillor Nychuk. The integrity of those berms is job one for our community. We all saw what happened when that train berm blew up there in 2013. So let's make sure those berms are in really good shape. So that almost concludes 4.1. Oh, sorry, Councillor Moore, go ahead.
I just wanted to mention that there are two categories, as Tom had pointed out, the mitigation part and the reconstruction part. So potholes and other things would fall under the reconstruction part, and the mitigation would fall under all the rest of it. So, so we're talking about two different things here.
Yep. Understood. Any other questions or comments regarding business item 4.1? Excellent. Chris, do you need anything else from us on that item?
Not this time, Your Worship, or Acting Mayor Kinghorn. I can get away with it today.
You can.
But we will bring it back at a future one with the other conversation about the in-camera piece that I alluded to as well, because it may tie into some of this funding stream and some reallocation that may have a higher priority for council.
Excellent. Thanks, Chris. I see Don, you had your hand up again. Are you got more?
Yes. Just a question, like on Appendix B, are we going to determine the priorities of the remainder other than the first three that are already prioritized? the items that are we going to be able to determine the priorities at this point?
From our perspective, we'd like to see what council's perspective on those other ones. You know what staff's top 3 priorities are, as outlined by Tom. And of course, the finishing the work, that last 10%, I say, is always the most difficult to get done. And so it needs to be that focus from that perspective before we start something new. But certainly understanding what council thinks is important is really important for us to make help us make decisions and make recommendations to council, especially when we find out as we go through this summer construction period how much money we will actually have left over. As we get closer and closer to the end of the Southwest Dike and High Country Drive project and Center Street, we'll get more and more surety of exactly how much we're going to be sitting with, or how much deficit we may have, and we may have to dip into some of our own funds to offset any cost overruns that we see from the unforeseen regarding the deep utility installations. So, I think getting that perspective of council and what is important to you is really important to us. So we can start making some planning and doing some preliminary work from that perspective and keeping an eye on the rest of the budgets. Does that make sense, Councillor Moore?
Yes, but are you looking for that now?
Not necessarily today. I think because of the technology issues with trying to switch between screens, I think it's hard to kind of go through that. But I think this is for information. We have a subsequent CAL meeting at the end of this month as well, and probably an in-camera that will tie into that, and we can lay out those priorities at that point in time. So this is getting it on the agenda so that you guys, the research can start being done and that we can start building that. And maybe by 2 weeks, we'll have some more progress payments in as well, so we understand what costs are being put out there for all the projects out there.
Okay, I just wanted to add one little comment, is that I agree with Councillor Masterman about Beechwood cleanup and the Wallaceville cleanup areas where all the garbage is stuff out. They are from a mental, psychological standpoint, I think, very important projects. So if that can be a little bit of input for administration in determining priorities, that would be mine.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. That's really important to us to hear that as well. So we'll take.
So I have one question for Tom, and it is in regards to that cleanup. A lot of that property in behind there is not owned by either the province or ourselves. It's privately held lands. Is some of that granting money available to help out to clean up some of that?
Possibly. We'd have to look into that and have a discussion with Alberta Environment from the grant authorities on it. There's actually some property that is on the other side of the river that is owned by the town, although it's on the other side of the river. So, I mean, there could be some opportunities there to clean that up.
Yeah, if you're walking along the riverbank, along behind Wallaceville there, you can look over into that land on the other side, and there's hot tubs and buildings and all kinds of stuff on that privately held land as well. So I'm not sure I don't know what their financial position is, but I'm not sure how we can get that part cleaned up. Councillor Masterman?
Thank you again, Deputy Mayor Kinghorn. So just along those lines, I haven't been, and this isn't named anywhere in this report, but I haven't been to Rio Vista and walked back through there. But I'm assuming that there's some cleanup that, and the reason I haven't been back there is there's barriers and signs asking us not to go in there. So. But I assume that there's some cleanup back in there that will need doing at some point as well, similar to what's at Wallaceville and across the river at Wallaceville.
Yeah, potentially, yes. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. Good discussion, and we beat your 1 hour there, Tom. So that's a good thing. We'll move on to. Item 4.2, This is a presentation by COLA on the 2020 first quarter investment performance update. We have seen this historically in council chambers, but administration has decided to bring it to the COW. And so it's all yours, COLA.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Good afternoon, the Deputy Mayor and Council. I'm here to present the 2020 first quarter Town's investment performance update as of March 2020. Just like the Deputy Mayor recognized, we usually present this through the normal regular council meeting, but because this is just an update for council, we are not requiring any decision. But for transparency, especially for the public, we decided to bring it to Committee of the Whole. And going forward, it will be coming through the Committee of the Whole. The town invested the sum of 50 million with CIBC Wood Gundy in August 2017 from surplus cash available as part of our efficient cash flow management strategy, and of course, fiscal discipline to maximize the use of town's funds. The surplus cash was as a result of cash flow timelines for various ongoing capital projects, as well as various town capital reserves and other long-term payables. So the overall value of our portfolio as at the end of March 2020 was 54 million, a little over 54 million. Cumulative growth of about 4.1 million over the period from 2017 August to March 2020. And this is about 8% growth in our portfolio. The increase in the portfolio is due to realized gains on some of the investment we sold and accumulated interest, which we reinvested back into the portfolio from inception to date. The primary purpose of the town's investment, just to reiterate once again, in the order of priority, are as follows. Safety of the taxpayers' money is the most priority, followed by liquidity, and lastly by return. Return is not the primary focus of our investment. Is the least on the purpose. The town will continue to adopt a low-risk investment strategy to meet the primary objective one, which is the safeguard of the principal amount. As of March 2020, the town's investment portfolio complied strictly with the council-approved investment policy with a low-risk strategy adherence. So all those criteria are listed in the report. And as at the end of March, we complied strictly with all the council-approved guidelines. The total interest income forecast for 2020 is in the neighborhood of 1.8 to 2 million. Our actual interest received as of March 31st was 1.3 million. And accrued interest yet to be paid as of March was about 400,000. We sold 4 investments within the first quarter of this year with a total returns of close to 1 million, which was part of why you see interest income of 1.3. We sold 4 investments with a returns of about 1 million, and we reinvested them back into the portfolio. The market value of our investment as at March 31st was 52.6 million. However, as at May, which is last week, the market value of our investment stood at 54.6. You realize at the beginning of the COVID-19, there were a lot of panic in the market and a lot of turbulence, but the market is stable now. And I'm happy to tell you that our investment they are still doing well. As of last week, the market value was 54.6. And also to mention at this stage, whatever happens at the market floor, all our investments are protected principal protected, so we can't lose anything below our principal amount. All individual investment within our portfolio are in compliance with the council approved investment policy, like I said. And also, finally, about 50% of whatever interest income we earn each year are allocated back to the capital projects and reserves where the funds were originally came from. And the balance thereof will then be available for the town to meet the 2020 approved operating budget revenue targets. So that's all of my presentation. I can take any of the questions. Thanks.
Excellent. Well done, Kola. It's nice to see. I'm pretty happy with that. I know I wish my investments through. Any questions for Kola? I see one hand, Councillor Masterman.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Mayor Kinghorn. Kola, thanks so much for another great report and for keeping this stuff in front of us as well in a way that we can understand. I know it's the law, but I really appreciate the effort that you and your team go to get this to us. I tripped over one thing, and I'm sure it's just me. Page 38. The heading for what comes after is the council exit package, and I'm just wondering why it's called that. Did anybody else see that?
I think you are the exit package is for the regular meeting at 3 o'clock, which is for the financial statement. This one is on the investment.
Right.
And if I can just quickly explain that, I'm sure the auditor will explain it. Exit package means the summary of his report.
Okay.
All right. The summary of their audit finding. Yes.
Thank you very much. I should have done better in my note taking here. And again, I'm having trouble to seeing the report up at the same time. So thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Thank you, Kola. Are there any more questions regarding item 4.2, quarterly investment report? Councillor Moore.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor Kinghorn. Could I direct this to Kola? Kola, on the actual $50 million investment is composed of grants that we're going to be gradually using for our completion of our projects. Due to the volatility of the market, it's very susceptible to ups and downs right now. Is there a chance when we get to the point where we actually have to take out money from that the market would be at a very low stage, or are we protected in your choice of investments that they would not go below the 50 million?
Yes, thank you for that brilliant question. Yes, the way we structured our portfolio is to enable us to get access to the funds at various stages. Some are within 2 years, some within 3 years, some within 4 years. But however, we don't wait until maturity for some of them. Once we see that they are performing well in the market, we take advantage, we sell them off, and we realize the gain. Not only that, we still have some funds which we have in our bank accounts, which will enable us to pay to meet any of our urgent obligations. As we speak, we still have about 30 million in GICs, which those ones are almost ready cash, waiting for the execution of this ongoing project. So we are properly protected. I don't foresee us selling anything beyond maturity or at a loss.
Thank you, Kola.
Thank you.
Excellent. Chris, anything you need from us on this item 4.2?
Acting Mayor Kinghorn, nothing at this point in time, no.
Awesome. Thank you. Moving on to our last item, question and answer period. I'm looking for hands. There we go. Councillor McMillan.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Kinghorn. It's kind of a question and a comment, but something's been kind of nagging at me since our May 11th council meeting regarding the FCSS grants no longer being given to the community. And I think what's happened for me, it's a little bit about this virtual format, but I kind of feel that I didn't have enough information to accurately make an informed decision, and I'm going to explain why. But I guess also I've been reflecting upon my past of working in nonprofits and just thinking about how difficult it is to get community funds. So and also I think it's a little bit about, I'm used to having delegations in front of us as well, where we can hear why it's important for them. And then I was having these thoughts, and then it was ironic because Orvella reached out to have a meeting with me. And I didn't realize that, for example, they don't have any government funding. And I'm going to backtrack a little bit because one of the comments that came up is that we have to take care of our own. And I understand that because I'm very much pro FCSS. But then I was thinking about these nonprofit groups that have formed in our community, and they are our own, and they've worked very diligently. Now, I know we've made our decision about, the grant funding, but I guess just pointing to the fact that even on our virtual meetings, we have directors, which that's great, but Shelley isn't here to speak to it. And like I said, public delegations, and even to make public comments, a lot of people don't feel comfortable in writing in. And I know I'm a little bit blathery here, but just bear with me. So I guess what I'm kind of putting back towards administration is, can we receive some thorough information about how this decision was made to begin with? But also I'd like to see that our own FCSS and maybe Janelle and Shelley, but that they can work with, and I'm not just talking about Inclusion Foothills, but I was thinking about Food for Thought and Literacy for Life, just to actually, I'm not saying to handhold because these are strong nonprofits. Upon my research, like the United Way isn't a guaranteed funder for these either. So I was just putting forward that I would hope that our community resources group and team will help work with these nonprofits so that they can be sustainable. Because, like I said, I do way better with in-person public engagement than this virtual type. And I also want to offer Deputy Mayor Kinghorn an apology because you were trying to convince us to have this go back for discussion at the Committee of the Whole. So I honor that, and I apologize that I didn't listen because, like I said, the whole virtual thing, I'm getting kind of tired of the virtual myself. So thank you. That's just my comment.
Thanks, Councillor McMillan. Yeah, the virtual thing is a different reality that we have, and I think we've got it for probably about another month, maybe two. We'll see what happens. I too do miss being in chambers and being able to have these discussions. So again, thank you. Councilman Masterman.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Kinghorn. And sorry, this is just a weather report. And I only give this report because it's rumbling out there, and those of us, who were at our homes, more susceptible to power failures if there's lightning, and there is a severe thunderstorm watch for High River right now. So I just wanted to mention that if suddenly my screen goes black, all our screens go black. Again, another joy of these virtual meetings. So thanks.
Thanks for that, Councilman Masterman. I wondered why my dog headed for the covers. So I guess that's the end of item 5. So I will adjourn the Committee of the Whole meeting for June 8th, 2020. Thank you, Council. I will see you all in administration, of course, and I'll see you all back here at 3 o'clock. Enjoy the weather.